I had been living inside a loop I couldn't name. Wake up, work, return home, sleep. The days stacked themselves quietly, each one pressing a little more weight onto my chest. At 26, I told myself this was normal, that stability often felt like silence. Still, something in me felt paused, as if I were waiting for a moment that hadn't been scheduled yet. I didn't know what I was waiting for, only that the waiting had grown exhausting. That was why I went to the swimming pool that evening. Not for fitness, not even for distraction. I went because water had always been the one place where noise softened. Beneath the surface, thoughts blurred, and the sharp edges of loneliness dulled. I expected nothing more than a few slow laps and the comfort of routine. I didn't expect a beginning. The pool was nearly empty, the air thick with chlorine and echoes. Fluorescent lights shimmered across the water like restless thoughts. I changed quickly, avoiding the mirror, and slipped into the pool. The coolness shocked me into awareness, and for the first time all day, I breathed fully. As I swam, the rhythm steadied me. Count strokes, turn, repeat. For a moment, life felt manageable. That was when I noticed him that he wasn't loud or imposing. He didn't demand attention. He simply existed in a way that altered the space around him. Lucas Reed stood at the edge of the pool, testing the water with his foot, hesitating as if weighing a decision far heavier than a swim. He looked older than me, but not by much. There was a calmness about him that felt earned rather than effortless, and beneath it, something unsettled. I recognized it because I carried the same thing that I told myself to look away. Pools were public places, people came and went. But when Lucas entered the water and began swimming a lane parallel to mine, our paths kept aligning. Every turn brought us briefly face to face, a flicker of acknowledgement before we pushed off in opposite directions. It was nothing. It was everything that we stopped at the same time, resting against the pool's edge. Silence stretched between us, not awkward, just present. He spoke first. Busy day? Lucas asked, his voice low. Steady, always, I said. Yours? He smiled faintly, the kind that suggested an unfinished thought. Yeah. That was it. No dramatic exchange, no spark anyone else would have noticed. But something in me leaned forward, attentive. We talked in fragments, about work schedules, about how the pool was quieter at night. He told me he came here to think. I said I came to forget. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Lucas mentioned he was married in the same way someone mentions the weather, factually, without emphasis. The word settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. His eyes told me enough, that marriage did not always mean companionship, and commitment did not always quiet loneliness. Still, the knowledge shifted something inside me. A line appeared where there hadn't been one before. That I left the pool early, unsettled by how easily time had folded around him. Outside, the night air felt sharper. As I walked home, Lucas's voice replayed in my mind, not for what he said but for what he didn't. I wondered why a married man spent his evenings swimming alone, and why I cared. The next day, Mason Clark noticed immediately. Mason had always been able to read me in ways I pretended not to understand. Over coffee, he watched me stir my cup long after the sugar had dissolved. You look distracted, he said. Or interested. Those two usually travel together. It's nothing, I replied, too quickly. Mason raised an eyebrow but let it go. He knew better than to push before I was ready. Just don't confuse quiet moments for solutions, he said, almost casually. They can be misleading. That evening, I found myself back at the pool without admitting why. Lucas was already there, sitting on the bench, towel draped over his shoulders. When he saw me, his expression shifted, surprise first, then something like relief. We didn't comment on the coincidence. Some things felt safer unnamed. Our conversations grew longer, though they remained careful. Lucas spoke about deadlines, about expectations that never seemed to end. I spoke about feeling invisible in rooms full of people. We never crossed into confession, but the closeness crept in anyway, subtle and persistent. I became aware of how easily I listened to him, how my thoughts rearranged themselves around the possibility of these evenings continuing. At one point, Lucas fell quiet, staring at the water. "Do you ever feel like one decision could reroute everything?" he asked. "Yes," I said, because the answer was already inside me. When I left that night, I knew something had changed, not around me, but within me. The pool, once a place of escape, had become a threshold. I hadn't crossed it, not yet, but I could see the other side clearly enough to fear it. As I walked home, I understood that this was no longer just about swimming or conversation. It was about the choices I hadn't made and the consequences waiting patiently for me to choose. That I told myself I would stop going. I told myself this was where it ended. But even as I promised restraint, I felt the pull of return, and the certainty that whatever I was stepping toward would not let me leave unchanged. I tried to keep my promise to myself, but restraint unraveled quietly. I returned to the pool under the excuse of habit, telling myself routines deserved consistency. Yet each evening I arrived, my attention searched the water before my body felt its temperature. When Lucas Reed wasn't there, the pool felt hollow. When he was, everything sharpened. Our conversations shifted from casual to careful. Not careful in avoidance, but in precision, as if we were both aware that every word carried weight. Lucas spoke more openly now, his guarded calm thinning. He never complained about his husband, Daniel Reed, yet absence hovered in his stories. Long work hours. Dinners eaten separately. Shared spaces that no longer felt shared. He didn't frame it as suffering, only as erosion that I listened too closely. I knew that. Each detail settled into me, not as gossip but as responsibility. I began measuring my responses, fearful of encouragement yet unwilling to withdraw. The line I had noticed before didn't disappear, it stretched, blurred, tempted. One night, after swimming, we sat farther from the pool, wrapped in towels, the air heavy with the smell of chlorine and the sound of distant traffic. Lucas stared at the floor, tracing patterns with his foot. "I don't think I'm unhappy," he said slowly. "I think I'm unattended." The word struck harder than any confession. I understood it immediately. Being unseen didn't always hurt loudly. Sometimes it just thinned you out, piece by piece. I wanted to say something reassuring, something neutral, something that wouldn't pull us closer. Instead, I said, "That's a lonely place to be." Lucas looked at me then, really looked, as if weighing the cost of honesty. In his eyes, I saw gratitude tangled with caution. He nodded, once, and the moment passed, but not without leaving its mark. Mason Clark noticed the change before I admitted it to myself. We met again for coffee, and this time I didn't bother pretending. "There's someone," I said. Mason didn't smile. "Is there a complication, or are you just dramatic by nature?" "He's married," I replied. Silence followed, thick and deliberate. Mason leaned back, studying me with concern rather than judgment. "And you're telling me because you already know this isn't harmless?" "I haven't done anything," I said. "I know," Mason replied. "That's usually how it starts." His words lingered long after we parted. I told myself awareness counted as control, that acknowledging danger was the same as avoiding it. Still, that evening, I found myself back at the pool, drawn less by habit than by gravity. Lucas seemed tense that night, distracted in a way that unsettled me. After swimming, he spoke quickly, as if time were scarce. Daniel had noticed his absences, he said. Asked questions. Nothing accusatory, just curious. That somehow made it worse. "I don't want to lie," Lucas said. "But I don't know how to explain needing space without sounding ungrateful." I felt the pull then, unmistakable and frightening. Not the pull toward him, but toward being the one who understood him best. I recognized the danger of that role, how easily empathy could masquerade as permission. "You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that disappears," I said, then immediately wished I had chosen different words. Lucas exhaled, a sound caught between relief and regret. "That's what scares me," he said. "That when someone finally sees you, it's already too late." We didn't touch. We didn't say anything else that crossed a line. Yet when we parted, the space between us felt charged, like something unresolved humming beneath the surface. I walked home with a heaviness that sleep couldn't soften. The following days were restless. I replayed conversations, searching for moments I could undo. I thought about Daniel Reed, a man I had never met, whose presence shaped my choices without his knowledge. I wondered if Lucas was doing the same, carrying me into spaces I didn't belong. When Lucas didn't show up for several nights, relief and disappointment wrestled inside me. I told myself this was for the best. I tried to reclaim the pool as neutral ground. It didn't work. On the fourth night, he returned. Lucas looked tired, the calm he usually wore frayed at the edges. We sat without swimming, words slow to come. Finally, he spoke. I told Daniel I needed time, he said. Not away. Just time. My chest tightened. And? He asked if there was someone else. Lucas swallowed. I said no. The truth of that answer hovered, fragile and debatable. I felt implicated without having acted, responsible without having chosen. The weight of it pressed down on me, demanding clarity I wasn't ready to give. I don't want to be the reason you break something, I said quietly. Lucas met my gaze, his expression steady but pained. I don't want to keep living like nothing's breaking. We sat there, suspended between confession and restraint, the pool's surface perfectly still. In that silence, I understood that the change I'd felt on my first night hadn't been a moment, it had been a direction. And whether I stepped forward or pulled away, something irreversible had already begun.